I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. On International Women's Day, a new poll suggests that 63% of Canadians believe gender equality is still a far-off concept in this country. There was a division of opinion on most of the questions pollsters asked. 73% of women said they feel equality has not been achieved, compared with 53% of men. Only 68% of women respondents said they believe equality has been achieved to some extent at home, compared with 80% of men. The Public Health Agency of Canada says the country will receive nearly 445,000 COVID-19 vaccine shots from Pfizer-BioNTech this week, with another 465,000 doses expected from Moderna. The influx of new shots comes as the federal government looks for vaccine makers to finalize delivery of a total of 8 million doses by March 31st. Ottawa isn't expecting any new deliveries from AstraZeneca Oxford, nor does it anticipate receiving shipments of the newly approved vaccine from Johnson & Johnson until next month. Meanwhile, Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam says it's been a very good week for Canada's COVID-19 vaccination programs, and the recent approval of the Johnson & Johnson and Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines has her hopeful for the future. This Thursday marks 1 year since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, and Dr. Tam says the past 12 months have been difficult. But she says even with the hardship and sacrifices of the pandemic, she has also witnessed remarkable courage, strength, and generosity demonstrated by Canadians. The COVID-19 pandemic had Statistics Canada contemplating delaying this year's census until 2022. But the agency eventually decided to go ahead with the survey by relying more heavily on online forms than face-to-face interactions. Newly released documents show the census plan was developed in a normal operating context, where tens of thousands of staff and temporary hires would interact with each other and Canadians. Officials worried that in a pandemic, the existing plan had a high probability of failure. The Conservatives say that they will ask the House of Commons Defence Committee today to summon 2 senior Liberal aides to testify as they continue to investigate the government's handling of the claims against General Jonathan Vance. The Tories say they want to hear when Zita Astravas and Elder Marquis first learned of sexual misconduct allegations surrounding the military's top or former top soldier. Ms. Astravas was Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan's chief of staff, and Mr. Marquis was a senior advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Well, in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, Canada's tourism industry is facing a crisis greater than the combined impacts of September 11th, 2001, the SARS outbreak, and the global financial crisis. The findings come in a report from Destination Canada, which promotes domestic travel. It says people should change their international travel plans and tour Canada instead to kickstart the industry. More Canadian oil and gas is being funneled to the U.S. as commodity prices recover from the economic slump brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Federal data shows Canada exported more than 190,000 barrels of oil a day in December 2020, twice the level posted just 4 months earlier. But opposition to cross-border pipelines is poised to put more of that oil and gas on trains, a transportation method that experts say is less safe. Many point to the 2013 explosion that killed 47 people in the Quebec town of Lac-Mégantic and say that the U.S. is ill-equipped to deal with such a disaster. A group of analysts at Statistics Canada are examining the issue of recent immigrants leaving Canada due to the economic struggles during the COVID-19 pandemic. The agency says that the number of permanent residents who have been in Canada for less than 5 years declined by 4% between 2019 and 2020. That is after a decade that averaged 3% increases each year. A study by Statistics Canada released in August showed that in the early months of the pandemic, recent immigrants to Canada were more likely than Canadian-born workers to lose their jobs. Legal experts are hopeful that changes to Canada's Divorce Act will better protect children. Family law professor Sarah Ramshaw in Victoria says the amendments emphasize the needs of children during divorce hearings and minimize custody battles. She points to a case involving the Christmas 2017 deaths of 2 young girls. Their father, Andrew Barry, was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder in their deaths. The girls' mother, Sarah Cotton Elliott, says she supports the amended Divorce Act. A member of the Canadian Armed Forces who died in Afghanistan was repatriated at CFB Trenton, Ontario on Sunday. Master Warrant Officer Guy Adam Law was found dead in his quarters at the Canadian Embassy in Kabul on February 25th. Few details have been released, only that the cause of his death is under investigation and is being assessed as non-operational. Top stories from this past week coming up, starting in BC, where call centers reported receiving over 1 million calls for vaccine appointments. Call centers in BC had a staggering 1.7 million calls in less than 3 hours after they opened to book COVID-19 vaccine appointments for the province's oldest residents. The phone lines opened for people over 90 and Indigenous people over 65 to book their time slots. Health Minister Adrian Dix says he believes people outside of those categories are jamming up the lines. Dr. Dix is urging anyone not in those age groups or calling on behalf of someone in those categories to wait their turn. He is also promising that the province will do better. Alberta's opposition NDP is criticizing Premier Jason Kenney for allowing some of his United Conservative Caucus members to publicly challenge health rules as unreasonable restrictions on freedoms. In question period yesterday, Rachel Notley said that elected officials must be held to a higher standard to ensure everyday Albertans follow public health orders. Drew Barnes, one of the dissenting UCP caucus members, said it's a politician's responsibility to channel and amplify the concerns of those they represent. More Albertans will be allowed to shop in stores and malls as the province continues to lift COVID-19 public health restrictions. Health Minister Tyler Shandro says the retail limit is increasing to 25% capacity from 15%.
We all want to get back to normal as soon as possible, but not at the cost of a lot more families losing loved ones if we can prevent it, and not at the cost of overburdening the ICUs and other services again. But the situation is changing, and we need to change along with it. We said that we'd complete step 2 when it was safe to do so, and I believe that it now is.
Weddings of up to 10 people and funeral services with a maximum of 20 people are allowed, and banquet halls, community halls, and conference centers can also open for meetings. Indoor gatherings remain banned, and outdoor gatherings are limited to 10 people. Well, Saskatchewan led the country yesterday with the highest rate of active COVID-19 cases per capita. Many infections were in and around the capital. On Monday, health officials in Saskatchewan reported 97 new infections, 50 of them in the Regina area. A provincial lab also confirmed 2 more cases in that zone of the variant first detected in the United Kingdom. A new indoor garden in Winnipeg that will feature plants from Manitoba and around the world won't open this year as scheduled. The leaf is to be the centerpiece of the Assiniboine Park's upcoming Diversity Gardens. Officials say the pandemic added challenges to the construction, and the installation of the translucent membrane for the roof was delayed due to the onset of winter. Due to the seasonal nature of some aspects of construction and planting, the opening will not take place in 2021. A union that represents many of Ontario's liquor store workers says it objects to 7-Eleven's recent liquor store sales license applications in Ontario. The Ontario Public Service Employees Union says 7-Eleven's plans could hurt homegrown businesses and expose children to intoxicated people in stores. 61 7-Eleven Canada locations are applying with the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario to host indoor alcohol consumption. Obstetricians and gynecologists in Ontario are welcoming the news that the province is planning to include pregnant women on its priority list of recipients in the next phase of its COVID-19 vaccination plan. Dr. Constance Nasello says that although pregnant women were excluded from initial trials of the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines, there is evidence that the vaccines are safe for them. Saskatchewan is the only other province to explicitly include pregnant people in its priority list for vaccines. As of today, pharmacists in Nova Scotia are allowed to administer COVID-19 vaccines. The provincial government says the first doses of vaccine to be administered in a pharmacy will be at the Guardian Pharmacy in Spryfield. Health officials in Nova Scotia reported no new cases of COVID-19 yesterday. The province had 24 active cases with 2 patients recovering in hospital. The Nova Scotia legislature opened with a speech from the throne today by Lieutenant Governor Arthur LeBlanc. The province's legislature was the only one in Canada not to have sat during the pandemic, which was declared almost a year ago. The three main parties in Nova Scotia plan to take part in a so-called hybrid sitting. That means most of the members will join the proceedings virtually, and only 12 representatives will be allowed to take their seats in the legislative chamber. Health officials in Newfoundland and Labrador are warning of a telephone scam concerning COVID-19 vaccinations. The Department of Health and Community Services says reports have been received about callers asking people to pay for their COVID-19 pre-registration and vaccination. Officials say pre-registration and vaccination is free and that they would not make these telephone calls or leave such messages. They say anyone who receives a suspicious telephone call or message should immediately report it to the nearest police detachment. All right, stay with us. This week, we continued our deeper look into the Line 5 pipeline, focusing on how its cancellation would affect the city of Sarnia, Ontario. We spoke with Sarnia's mayor after the break. Canada's Natural Resources Minister is calling the cross-border Line 5 pipeline a non-negotiable element of talks with the United States. Seamus O'Regan is vowing to defend the underwater pipeline as he testifies before a special House of Commons committee on Canada-U.S. relations. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer has pledged to shut down the Enbridge pipeline, which links Wisconsin and Sarnia, Ontario, through the Straits of Mackinac between Lakes Michigan and Huron. Minister O'Regan says the pipeline is a vital source of both jobs and energy for northern U.S. states, as well as southwestern Ontario and Quebec. He says a shutdown would instantly create an energy shortage in the region, equivalent to 14 million barrels of oil a day. Mr. O'Regan also says there are clear signs from the courts that a settlement between Michigan and Enbridge can be reached to avoid a shutdown. Well, to talk more on these developments, we are joined by the mayor of Sarnia, Mr. Mike Bradley. Welcome to Forum Daily, Mayor Bradley.
Thank you very much.
So how has the city of Sarnia been reacting to the potential cancellation of the Line 5 pipeline?
Well, quite obviously, with great distress, there are probably 3,000 jobs directly in the area, high-paid jobs that could be impacted with job losses if this line closes.
And sir, to understand the bigger picture, how much of this oil product is used in Ontario and Quebec overall?
Well, about 45% of the fuels used in this province in Ontario come through this line from the west. And that there are 3 refineries in Sarnia, and they are critical to the economic development of Eastern Canada. So to be put in this type of situation it's not very good for our relationships with Michigan. And if the United States president supports the closure of the pipeline, it will be a disastrous start to his relationship with Canadians.
And speaking of international relations, we understand that Line 5 also provides oil to some Midwest U.S. states. How much of this product does this line provide for international customers in the U.S.?
Well, this is the interesting part, is that in Michigan, it provides over 50% of the propane to the North Peninsula of Michigan. The Detroit Airport relies on the jet fuel, just as Toronto Airport does, that comes through this line. So it's not just Ontario and Quebec and Alberta impacts, it's also in the state of Michigan. And ironically, just a couple of weeks ago, Governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, had to declare a state of emergency because they didn't have enough propane. And that's with the line operating. So it's very hard to understand the motivation behind this.
And we know Minister O'Regan has been keeping you updated. What do we know so far about Mr. O'Regan's fight in the courts to keep this pipeline operating?
Well, his position was quite quiet in the federal government still about a week ago. And I give the minister a lot of credit. They came out and said very clearly, we will fight this politically and we will fight it legally. And it's my own belief in the end, it'll probably be a legal solution and it'll probably be a negotiated solution, as was said in the intro, that will let both parties walk away with the line still operating.
And we know Enbridge, on the other hand, is looking for permits and approvals to replace the Michigan Great Lakes crossing with a $500 million tunnel. Would this be a possible solution?
Well, it is a solution. It's one of the reasons I support this proposal. $500 million that will employ Americans to upgrade and make sure this pipeline is safe, which, by the way, has never had an incident in its 60 years. So in this case, Michigan will win from this by getting better protection of the pipeline for the future, and also getting the jobs that will go with this. It'll be a long project to encase it, but they'll be Michigan jobs.
And for our Canadian viewers to understand this impact, what's at risk here, Mayor, in terms of the overall jobs and maybe even the cost of fuel if this pipeline is cancelled?
Well, there's more than that just a risk. I mean, there's 3,000 to 5,000 direct jobs. It also will mean that fuel costs will skyrocket in Ontario and Quebec. And you might recall just 2 years ago, there was a propane shortage because of the CN strike, and it was causing great distress in the farming community. So there's a lot of other impacts, and not just propane and oil come through this. The oil that comes through goes into thousands of products that enhance the Canadian economy. So there's a lot of impacts here. But one that I've written to my fellow mayors in Ontario that needs to be remembered, if this is supposed to be environmentally prudent, what it's going to do if the line closes is put more trucks, more rail cars, more barges into the environment. And who wins from that?
Interesting point there, Mayor. Now, we've got a little under a minute left, but what can Canadians do to add their concerned voices to this campaign, sir?
Well, I think it'd be helpful. This is remarkable. We have all the political parties, except the Green, as far as I know, supporting this. That's really rare. We've got the BQ supporting this on a pipeline. That's just amazing given the pipeline politics of this country. I'd suggest they contact a member of parliament, tell them they're supportive. They don't want their fuel costs going up. They don't want more rail cars and trucks in their communities. And they don't want added fuel prices.
All right, Mayor Bradley, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, when we get back, a look at some of the top stories that made news around the world this past week. The U.S. Congress sent its COVID-19 relief bill to the president to be signed, and the National People's Congress in China approved a move to tighten control in Hong Kong. More international stories coming up in our Week in Review. The U.S. Congress has sent President Joe Biden the landmark $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief bill.
I want to thank Speaker Pelosi and the House of Representatives today for passing the bill, and I will be signing into law shortly. This bill represents a historic victory for the American people. I look forward to signing it later this week. Everything in the American Rescue Plan addresses a real need, including investments to fund our entire vaccination effort, more vaccines, more vaccinators, and more vaccination sites.
Most notable to many Americans are provisions to provide up to $1,400 direct payments to most adults and extend $300 per week emergency unemployment benefits into September. Included in the bill are hundreds of billions of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments for schools, state and local governments and ailing industries. Amnesty International accused Myanmar's military government today of increasingly using battlefield weapons against peaceful protesters and conducting systemic, deliberate killings. Myanmar has been roiled by protests and civil disobedience since a February 1st military coup that toppled the elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi, just as it was to start its second term after 5 decades of military rule. China's ceremonial legislature today endorsed the ruling Communist Party's latest move to tighten control over Hong Kong by reducing the role of its public in picking the territory's leaders. The measure to give a pro-Beijing committee power to appoint more of Hong Kong's lawmakers adds to a crackdown against a protest movement in Hong Kong calling for greater democracy. The crackdown has prompted complaints that Beijing is erasing the autonomy promised when Hong Kong was handed to China in 1997. The Israeli military says it has vaccinated the vast majority of its soldiers, allowing the military to resume many of its normal operations. The army announced on Thursday that nearly 80% of its soldiers have either been vaccinated or recovered from COVID-19. It expects that number to increase to 85% in the coming days. Military officials say they cannot force remaining soldiers to be vaccinated. Units in which 90% of the soldiers have been vaccinated have much more flexibility in terms of training, gathering, and operating. Japan has marked the 10th anniversary of the deadly tsunami disaster that claimed 18,000 lives and displaced another 500,000 people. The magnitude 9.0 quake that struck on March 11, 2011, set off a massive tsunami that swept far inland, destroying key infrastructure and causing the meltdowns at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Many survivors walked to the seaside or visited graves to pray for relatives and friends washed away by the water. At least 26 people are dead and another 35 injured after the brakes apparently malfunctioned on an Indonesian tourist bus, sending it plunging into a ravine on the main island of Java. The vehicle was carrying a group of Islamic junior high school students and their parents. Survivors say the bus plunged into the 20-meter deep ravine after the driver lost control of the vehicle in an area with a number of sharp declines in Sumedang district. The United Nations chief says Syria faces a living nightmare 10 years after peaceful demonstrations were violently suppressed, setting the country on a horrific path of destruction and bloodshed. Secretary General Antonio Guterres marked the 10th anniversary of Syria's conflict that began in mid-March 2011 with a critique of the impact of the war on the Syrian people. He says Syria has endured some of the greatest crimes the world has witnessed this century, and the scale of the atrocities shocks the conscience. Mexico has approved a marijuana legalization bill, setting the country on the path to becoming one of the world's largest legal marijuana markets. The approved legislation, which needs to return to the Senate, would permit recreational use of marijuana, but establish a system of licenses required for the entire chain of production, distribution, transformation, and sales. It would also require that individuals, and not just associations of users, would need a permit to grow plants for personal use. In Finland, 23-year-old Juho Konkola is catching international attention for his extensively detailed origami models. The Lapland University art graduate began folding origami models when he was just 8 years old. He would often spend months making paper characters inspired from history, folk tales, books, movies, mythologies, and more. But every piece of art that Mr. Konkola makes is folded from a single square sheet of paper, and there's never any cutting involved. He says the extensive creative process is therapeutic for him. I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. All right, thanks for joining us on Forum Daily Week in Review.